I've lived in my house for 6 years. It's nothing fancy. A small 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood with a single-car garage and a driveway that can fit 2 cars comfortably. I'm not particularly close with my neighbors, but we've always been cordial, exchanging waves and small talk when we see each other. About 8 months ago, a new family moved in next door, a couple in their 30s with 2 teenage kids. They seemed nice enough at first, and I brought over cookies to welcome them to the neighborhood. Everything was fine for the first month or so. Then one evening I came home from work to find a car I didn't recognize parked in my driveway. I figured it must belong to a visitor who didn't realize they were parking on my property, so I knocked on my new neighbor's door to ask if the car was theirs. The husband, Mark, answered. "Oh yeah, that's our son's car," he said casually. "Hope you don't mind. We had some family over and needed the extra space." "I do mind, actually," I said politely. "That's my driveway, and I need to park there. Could you have him move it, please?" Mark seemed surprised by my response, but nodded. "Sure, no problem. He'll move it right away." The car was gone within 10 minutes, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I came home to find another unfamiliar car in my driveway. This time, I saw Mark's wife, Lisa, unloading groceries from it. Again, I approached her and explained that they couldn't park in my driveway without permission. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "Our daughter had friends over and they took up our driveway. I'll just be a few minutes." True to her word, she moved the car after unloading her groceries. But what I thought were isolated incidents soon became a pattern. Every few days I'd come home to find one of their cars, or sometimes a car belonging to their visitors, parked in my driveway. Each time I'd have to go over and ask them to move it. Each time they'd offer some excuse about needing extra space, having visitors, or it just being more convenient for them. After about a month of this, I'd had enough. I decided to have a more serious conversation with them. I caught both Mark and Lisa outside one weekend and explained that my driveway was private property and not available for their use. "Look," I said firmly but politely, "I understand that parking can be tight sometimes, but you can't keep using my driveway. I need that space for myself and my visitors." Mark shrugged. "We're not hurting anyone, are we? It's just a concrete slab. If you're not using it at the moment, what's the big deal?" "The big deal is that it's my property," I replied, trying to keep my cool, "and I never know when I might need to leave in a hurry or have someone over who needs to park." Lisa joined in. "Don't be so uptight. We're neighbors. Neighbors help each other out." "I'm happy to help in many ways," I said, "but my driveway isn't communal property. Please respect that boundary." They grudgingly agreed, but I could tell they thought I was being unreasonable. Sure enough, the very next day, I came home to find their daughter's car in my driveway. That's when I decided to escalate. I printed out a polite but firm letter stating that my driveway was private property and any unauthorized vehicles would be towed at the owner's expense. I attached the local ordinance that confirmed my right to have vehicles towed from my property. I put one copy in their mailbox and another on their front door to make sure they received it. The next time I saw Mark outside, he waved the letter at me. "Really? Threatening to tow us? That's not very neighborly." "I'm not threatening," I clarified. "I'm informing you of what will happen if you continue to park on my property after repeated requests to stop." "Whatever," he scoffed. "Nobody's going to tow a car over something so petty." I hoped the letter would be enough of a deterrent, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. Over the next week, they parked in my driveway even more frequently, almost as if they were testing me to see if I'd follow through on my warning. The final straw came last Friday. I had told them earlier in the week that I had friends coming over for dinner on Friday evening and would need both my garage and driveway clear. They nodded and said they understood. Yet when I got home from work that Friday, both spots in my driveway were taken, one by Mark's SUV and another by what I recognized as their son's friend's car. I went next door immediately. Mark answered, beer in hand. "Your cars are in my driveway," I said, no longer bothering with pleasantries. "I told you I have guests coming tonight." "Oh, right," he said, looking unconcerned. "We're having a little get-together too. Just park on the street this once. It's not a big deal. I stared at him in disbelief. No, I won't park on the street. It's my driveway. Move the cars now, please. Look, he said, his tone condescending. Our guests are already here and comfortable. Your friends probably aren't even on their way yet. Just be cool about this. I took a deep breath. Move the cars within the next 30 minutes, or I'm calling a tow truck. This is your final warning. He rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure you will. Then he closed the door in my face. I went back to my house fuming. I waited exactly 30 minutes, watching from my window to see if they'd move the cars. They didn't. So I called the towing company listed on the sign at the entrance to our neighborhood. The dispatcher told me they could send someone within the hour. I provided my address and the details of the unauthorized vehicles, along with proof that I owned the property. Then I sent a final text to Mark. Tow truck has been called. Last chance to move the cars. He didn't respond, and the cars remained in my driveway. The tow truck arrived around 9 p.m., just as my friends were due to arrive. The driver verified my ID and property ownership, then got to work hooking up the first car. That's when Mark burst out of his house, shouting, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he yelled, running toward us. Exactly what I said I would do, I replied calmly. These cars are being towed for unauthorized parking on private property. Mark tried to argue with the tow truck driver, but the driver simply showed him the documentation I had provided and informed him that he would need to take it up with the towing company. One by one, both cars were hooked up and taken away. The look on Mark's face was a mixture of shock and fury. He clearly hadn't believed I would actually follow through on my warning. His son's friend came out, confused and angry about where his car had gone. "You're gonna pay for this," Mark hissed at me before storming back to his house, his son's friend trailing behind him looking bewildered. My friends arrived just minutes after the tow truck left, and we had our dinner as planned. I filled them in on the situation, and they were supportive of my actions, agreeing that I had given the neighbors more than enough warnings. The real fallout came the next morning. I was awakened around 6 a.m. by shouting outside. I looked out my window to see Mark and Lisa standing in my front yard, screaming, up at my house. Several other neighbors had come outside to see what the commotion was about. "You had our cars towed in the middle of the night," Lisa was yelling. "Do you know how much that cost us? $800 to get them back." I went outside, still in my pajamas, trying to keep my voice calm and even. "I warned you multiple times not to park in my driveway. I gave you a written notice that unauthorized vehicles would be towed. I even texted you right before it happened, giving you one last chance to move them." "It was completely unnecessary," Mark shouted. "You could have just waited until morning." "I had guests coming," I reminded him, "just like I told you earlier in the week. You chose to ignore that." By this point, several other neighbors had gathered around, watching the drama unfold. Some were clearly on my side, nodding as I spoke, while others looked disapproving. One neighbor, an older woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, stepped forward. "Mark, Lisa, it is his driveway. You can't just park there without permission." "Stay out of this, Barbara," Lisa snapped. "You don't know the whole story." "I think I do," Barbara replied. "I've seen your cars in his driveway many times. I wondered how long he would put up with it." Mark turned back to me. "This isn't over. You've made enemies here, and you'll regret it." They eventually stormed off, but the damage to our neighborly relationship was complete. In the days that followed, I received mixed feedback from other neighbors. Some praised me for standing up for myself after giving so many warnings. Others felt I had escalated the situation unnecessarily by having the cars towed at night, suggesting I should have waited until morning. "You could have parked on the street for one night," one neighbor told me. "Was it really worth creating this much hostility?" Another pointed out, "If you let people walk all over you, they'll never stop. You did what you had to do." Mark and Lisa have been giving me the cold shoulder ever since, which is actually a relief compared to the previous situation. More importantly, they haven't parked in my driveway again. Mission accomplished, I suppose. Still, living next to people who now openly dislike me isn't exactly comfortable. Some mutual neighbors have suggested I should have found a more diplomatic solution. Others think Mark and Lisa got exactly what they deserved after repeatedly ignoring my I don't regret enforcing my boundaries, but I do wonder if having the cars towed at night was taking it too far. Should I have found another way to make my point, given them one more chance? Or was it necessary to take drastic action after so many warnings went unheeded? For getting my neighbor's cars towed after they repeatedly parked in my driveway despite multiple warnings, am I the a-hole?